Hi, I'm Dave Caissy, founder of the Innovation Leaders Club. In this video, we're going to cover the proactive risk management. It is part of a series that we have on innovation program, which was a team of our network back in 2024. So we made multiple videos covering innovation program. And in this proactive management, proactive risk management, should I say, this two-part video. So if you haven't watched the first video, I would recommend to watch part one, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of summary. In part one, we'll look at identify risk. So how we identify risk, which are related to the specific program. What is interesting is managing risk is something we often do not do really well at project level, because it takes effort and sometimes it's not that worth it at the project. But when we get at the program level, then it becomes more interesting, because sometimes if we are to manage proactively a risk, it might give some benefits to multiple projects, and also we're to develop into innovation for multiple years because we're in program, so it makes things much more interesting. Also, when we are at the innovation program, most of the time the level of risk are higher because we have more ambition towards innovation. But just key item for identifying risk, we got to make sure it's risk that are related to that program. You do not manage the business risk of your organization. It's really what relates to your program, and there were some few conditions we talked about. It has to be timely based, and also some few other criteria. Then we prioritize risk, because obviously there's much more risk than what you can manage. So we talked about some of the tools to prioritize them, and most ultimately it has to be done with key people within your team, because there's a lot of risk that you will have to drop and you will just manage a few. So you may use AI for the step one to support you in identifying the risk, but never use AI for step two and the other steps, because ultimately it has to be human that gets involved and that make the decision, because knowing that there's maybe 80% of the risk that you will not be able to proactively manage, you have to ensure people are behind this, and it's not because it was done by AI that people will believe into the result. They will believe in the result because they really got involved in. So in this video, we're going to cover the step three to draw up an action plan, but also how you implement follow-up. So the key question is, how many risks do you want to manage? And there's always limited resources. So we have to prioritize based on those resources in order to get the greatest benefits. And so the rule of thumb is the top 5 or top 10. So let's say if you have a list of 50 and you prioritize, and you will see in the part one of this mini series, part of a larger series or innovation program, that top 10 is usually what people do, or top 5 if you have some fatal risk. And fatal risks are above the top 5. Those are risks that if they do occur, your program is dead. Okay, so those need to be managed for sure. And so I've worked with the communication company that makes tactical radio. So that's a radio used on the field. So obviously it's critical that you don't want your enemy to be able to listen to your radio. So I got involved into that program, and so we build the risk management, the proactive risk management. So we had, I think it looks like in French, but you'll notice how the tool works. So the cost of the risk, the probability, so probability time the cost was the risk exposure here. So ultimately, and you see it's prioritized by risk exposure. If you look at the first video, you'll be able to get more information on that. And we had a plan that we're going to discuss today. So let's move into, should we prevent or should we, so prevent is really to work at the cause, which is within our control. So I'll give an example with a supplier. If you have a supplier that is, so your risk is your supply could be late. So, and he's on your critical path, and if you deliver late one day, but you're losing one day in your project, and maybe that makes that you're losing one day in your program. So how would you prevent? Then you look at, okay, what are the causes? Why would my supplier be late? Okay, maybe because I've selected a supplier which is not used to do this type of work. So, okay, so that's a cause. So, okay, so what could I do to prevent? So then I will audit my supplier. I will ask my supplier, was there any equivalent project that they did? If there was none, because I'm really innovators and nobody did that before, I'm going to try to give him a smaller project related to the same technology, for instance, but much more easier. And I will see proactively if he fails, it means when I'm going to give him the bigger project, he's going to fail just more. So those are the prevention. It's within my control. Contingency plan is when it's out of your control. So the cause will be on your control. So you want to innovate on something, and so your strategy is because you're going to be first on the market. But then you don't know what your competitor is doing. So if your competitor is going to the market with something similar and he arrives before you, this is a risk. And so what is your contingency plan in this case? How would you minimize the damage of the risk knowing that it's out of your control? So how you draw an action plan, then you have to go back to how the risk works. So the risk, there's a probability of it occur, and if it's occurred, it causes it has some negative impact. So there's a loss, what we call a risk exposure. So what is interesting here? It's the causes of the risk. Most of the time, there's multiple causes, not only one. But once you start listing those causes, so obviously you cannot do that for all risk. This is why you need to prioritize first. But when you have prioritized, then you can start looking at the cause of the risk, and then you really can do something about it. So and in Step 2, we look at the probability time, what the risk could be, and this is ultimately the loss. That was one of the two methods that was suggested to the. So we do an action plan with the top 5 to the one that are within our control. So we prevent those that are beyond our control or unforeseeable. It's a contingency plan or fatal risk. This is where we can do both. So we do both automatically on fatal risk. So it's a risk if it occur, it's infinite, the impact. So even though if it's 1% of chance, but the impact is infinite, so a risk exposure is infinite. So we need to make sure that we do both and we prevent but you see the other, we make a choice. We either prevent or contingency plan. So even the best action plan will not completely eliminate risk. And this is important. We mentioned that in the first video, in the first part, one of this two-part. This is, even though you sell an action plan to your team or to your management team, keep in mind there is some leftover risk that ultimately will have to be managed as well. So this is what you're going to get. So ultimately, you're going to get, in this case, I have priority 0, which is fatal risk. So I have prevention and contingency plan. So you notice I have both here. But my top 1 risk in this one, it's, so when I say top 5, it's top 5 plus the fatal. So this is why sometimes top 5 is enough, because you may have 2 or 3 fatal risk. So, and then my top 1 here, you see it's very important risk. So I prevent, and also I do contingency. But if I would do that for all risk, that would ask too much. So most of the time, then I make a decision. Is it in my control? This one, no. This is contingency. This one is within my control. Then I prevent. So this ultimately what you will do. So let's look at some example of prevention plan. So for those that are all within your control. So if you look at the risk, first thing that you can do is avoid the risk. So then you can transfer the risk, you can double the risk, or you can reduce the risk. So let's look at how you avoid the risk. It's obviously, it's forget about unnecessary risk. When I'm looking at some innovation, there's in a lot of cases, there are a lot of things which in fact are not necessarily necessary. And why people do add a lot of features sometimes is because they haven't listened clearly to their market. When you know exactly what they need, you deliver what they ask. You know more, and you can go that risk that don't pay off, and it looks like obvious, but sometimes it is not. And so one key way of doing this is reuse. So design reuse is definitely the best example. And this is why it gets really powerful in innovation program, because a program meant to develop a platform or to bring a platform to another level. So we really work at the platform level, while the different risks within a program are not the different project within a program are targeting the different features. So design reusing the platform. So it means that let's say first project, you develop the platform and it works, and you work really hard, but you're really proud and it satisfies needs. Then every additional project add a feature, and you may add a feature or two, and then you reuse everything else. So you see your risk is only on the feature you have added, and the interconnection with the platform itself, but you reuse a lot. So reusing, it is great. Like manufacturers love it because they can have economy of scale, because they have standard component at the base level. But even at service level, you reuse something that people do know. So they know, and then you add features, and this is awesome. So reuse as much as possible is definitely one of the best example. But keep in mind, like if you reuse too much, and ultimately sometimes you try to eliminate the risk, you eliminate the innovation. So it then looks at transfer. So that refers to your expertise. So when the in-house expertise is not available, let's say you don't have the expertise, okay, with this expertise would become a new core competency to us. If your innovation program brings you to a new technology, but at one point you will have to master that technology. So if you transfer right away and you do not develop the expertise, then it's an issue. But if it's not core to what you want to do, so it's a side technology, or it's a side thing to the, and especially that there's outside experience that you should use, then you should use it. So you transfer to these guys, and because that's their expertise. But be careful. It's not because you transfer it that this has disappeared. The risk is still present, and it could seriously affect the program. So sometimes people transfer risk, so they subcontract or they delegate or something, and they delegate and disappear. No, no, no. You delegate and you follow up and control. Okay? Then you could double. Double, it's use parallel or alternative solution, and it's a backup to the primary solution. It's usually on the critical path. So when you look at the shortest path to get from point A to B in a project, this is critical path. Is if you're losing a day on that delivery or on this activity, it would add a day to your project. So this is where you're looking at how you can double, and so it is costly because you're working double, and sometimes people inadvertently do it. So they keep options open, but more option you keep open, more time it takes because your backpack is heavier. So this is why you have to make decisions as you move along, and those decisions might you to walk faster. But there in some cases, and there's a very famous case about ThinkPad. If you look at the laptop computer, so ThinkPad used to belong to IBM, now it belongs to Lenovo, but they came up with the pad for the touchpad, and they weren't sure people will like that. So they had a touchpad plus their little mouse red dot in the keyboard. And so there was a double. And so they kept it for a few years. And ultimately, if you look at the ThinkPad right now, they still have that because it's almost like their brand. In fact, it is their brand, because if you look at ThinkPad, the on the eye, there's a red dot which refer to that. So it's a long story, like 20 years ago, that people have a double solution to manage risk, but it's still there now. It's become a brand. it's a very exception here because people don't do that, except for telecommunication, aerospace, uh, like in utility, electrical utility, when there's a critical system that they're going to make sure that there's plan B if something fails, and so they call it a primary and secondary, and so obviously there's then reduce. So this is where it really pays off. It's you really looking at addressing the cause of the risk. What is and again, I come back to my supplier delivery issue. The supplier could be late. Okay, why could it be late? Okay, because maybe it has not never done something similar before. Okay, so then I will attack this. And so you develop the action plan to reduce or eliminate that cause. And it's easy when the cause are well identified. So I said when you do your top 5 or top 10, then you can take each individual risk and deep dive into listing the cause, and then you're looking, okay, how can I prevent those costs to happen, and then you can identify and reduce right from the start. And this is where it really pays off. So ultimately, it's facts, based on facts, and the secret in risk management is to tackle those facts that leads to the risk and not the risk itself. Like people say, okay, my supplier could be late. Okay, so they move right away onto contingency plan. So they say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna keep the previous version and ensure it works, or in case of easily, but you're not preventing. Like you have a contingency, but if you go back to the facts, okay, is my supplier done that before? Am I haven't done was it in audit in the past? Was there like all kind of facts that allows you ultimately to manage? So the team without the appropriate experience and training tend to manage everything themselves and not the cause of the risk. I think my face is right there. So an example with the supplier being late, like they are working on the late, but it's not the late. It's why would he be late? So the cause. So this is the key of this step. So let's keep going. I'll bring myself back here. So contingency plan. So ultimately, we cannot manage all the risk. So there's and especially those that are out of our control. So we make a contingency plan. So again, it's easy when we know the cause of the risk, and so we got to be careful for contingency plan. It's to maybe unnecessary to have both prevent the risk and implement contingency plan, like I mentioned earlier, except for fatal risk or higher priority 1 in this case, and for the other risk, it's better to prevent. Prevent is the solution. It's like your house. Preventing your house from burning, it is much, much better than having insurance. Insurance is the contingency plan. So you want to prevent your house from burning. And so then you have to accept the risk. It's often better to accept low risk. And you have to accept risk that the cost of the action plan would exceed the benefits. So obviously, this is and the time margin or budget must be set aside for accepting the risk, kind of the buffer you will have. So let's say you say, okay, I have 15% buffer on my project. And people will say, yeah, but why 15%? And then you have all that list of those risks that you have identified that are not prioritized, and it justify your buffer. And if you do this, I can confirm you will be able to convince people to keep that buffer to you. And if you look at the probable loss that you should have, let's say if you would have made all the calculation for the risk that are left aside, then the margin you're keeping should be equivalent to the probable loss. But most of the time, people don't do all that calculation. So, and step 4, last but not the least, is oversee the implementation, the action plan. It's to monitor the evaluation, identify risk, and the emerge. If there's emerge new one, as you move into a project, keep in mind that you do proactive management risk early into the program. So then you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. So as you move along, you learn new stuff. So your risk plan should evolve, and it's really belongs to the program leader, the risk management of a program. Then there's some action then or get implemented within some project within the program, and that could be a project leader managing some of the action. But the ultimate aggregate consolidated risk management should belongs to the program manager. So let's go back to my story with Ultra Electronics. So in this story, we had this, you recall, we had and so what is really interesting is to see the follow-up. So when I trained them, and so they went to those are Canadian dollars, and you notice there was the risk exposure. So there was the different risk, and if you take the risk time, the probability, this probable risk, and then you do the sum of the probable risk, it gives you the risk exposure. Part one of the series, you see that they came up at 285,000. So then the who was funding the project, and in this case was a program, was not convinced. So he said, okay, Dave, it was good training you gave, but I don't think that they did that really well. So could you facilitate a workshop? So I facilitated a workshop using the training and the tools that I provided. And so you see, boom, almost double the risk. And I came up with the fatal risk because for them there was none, but in fact there are two. See, and then those were every 3 months, so every quarter we were tracking, and you see that it went down. So it went down for two reasons. Went down because we implement the action plan, and those are real data, by the way, and went down also because we there's risk or timely related, so sometimes they disappear by themselves. Example, if your supplier that could be late, if you get your delivery on time, then the risk disappears. But so it's a combination of the time and also the prevention plan that we were able to reduce. And so what is interesting is here was really difficult. So you notice it's like a 2-year, almost like a 2-year every quarter here. And so there was a lot of debate, and people were not confident that they could do such level of innovation. And ultimately, when they ended up here, the team and the people providing the funding, they said, okay, so what is next step? Now that we have done that and we are being successful, we want to do another ambitious innovation. And so people got confidence, and that's what you should do. I hope you like it. Cheers.
If you haven't already done so, you can get your hands on our popular 60-page visual guidebook for free. Click the link in the description below. Don't hesitate to watch the next video to learn even more about innovation management practices.